Friends, I know it's tough right now. And if you're struggling and thinking about leaving the teaching profession, or maybe you aren't sure how you're going to get through this school year, I hope you know I hear you. I want you to know right now that I appreciate your time with me, and I hope that some of what I offer you today will be a breath of fresh air. I want to share with you some ideas from a variety of sources, touched with a bit of my own experience, and likely a bit of what you've experienced in your own life during other challenging times as well. I want to be real with you this episode, and know that you may not agree with me or the authors of the books or other resources or stories, and you may get uncomfortable. Some of these stories are legends, some are truth, and some are real. I hope you know, like all the other resources you're getting at this time, you get to pick and choose what you accept, what you believe, and what you decide to implement in your own life. This is no different. I want to offer a disclaimer with this episode. The content in this episode is not intended to be a substitute for professional advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your mental health professional or other qualified health provider with questions you may have regarding how you're feeling. Never disregard professional advice or delay in seeking it because of something a layman like myself suggests. With that disclaimer, I want to welcome you to the Music Ed Mentor podcast, where we help music educators build, manage, and grow thriving school music programs and have long and happy careers. And this particular episode is no exception. I am your host, Elisa Jansen-Jones, and if we haven't met in person, that doesn't necessarily mean we aren't friends already. I hope that someday we do get to meet, and we can talk about your life and what you're going through right now, and maybe where you found solace and help. If you're a regular listener of this podcast, you know I'm all about the self-improvement. We've talked about mindfulness, being present, about morning routines and productivity. We've talked about affirmations and meditation and what books you should be reading and when you should be doing yoga. This episode, though, is different. Just as the times now are so different that we have to flip things on their head and talk about it from the other side. We're going to talk about some counterintuitive approaches to battling those feelings of anxiety, stress, and burnout that you may feel nipping at the edges of your sanity. But first, a huge shout out to Smart Music for sponsoring this podcast. There's a reason why I've partnered with Smart Music for the last 3.5 years of this effort. It's because they share the same mission as I do. Yes, they provide you with a great means of assessment and training for your students, whether they're in the classroom or home. Yes, they have the largest online library of music available for you to assign to your students. Yes, they make playing fun. They always have. But the true mission behind all of that is supporting teachers, creating musicians, and ensuring that teaching music is as efficient and effective as it can be. Learn more at smartmusic.com. And if you're worried about retaining your students through this challenging time, you're invited to join Conselmer Institute for a 2-day evenings-only workshop, December 14th and 15th. I'm one of the presenters and will be facilitating an interactive work session where we can share ideas on how to teach better online. But we'll also have speakers talking about everything from how to do beginning band instrument fittings online and how to excite and engage your students in online learning. To find the link to register, just visit the show notes for this episode. You'll find the show notes at smartmusic.com/blog. Just do a quick search for podcast. Now, take a deep breath and let's talk through this counterintuitive approach to battling burnout. One day, 2 monks set out for a temple in a valley beyond the woods. As they came to a beautiful rise in the trail, they began to hear a flowing river. As they descended the beautiful valley toward the river, the sound became louder and louder. There by the stream, a young woman sat weeping, for she was afraid to cross the river alone. Filled with compassion and without a word, the elder monk picked her up and carried her across the river. He set her down on the other side and continued on his journey. The younger monk followed, berating the older monk for what he had done, for they had taken a vow to never touch a woman. This continued all day, a long time, and as sunset approached, the older monk finally turned to the younger monk and said, "I put her down as soon as we crossed the river. Why are you still carrying her?" And with that, the elder monk turned and continued leading the way through the forest, leaving the younger monk to contemplate his words for the remainder of the journey. The compassion of the elder monk to put the needs of the maiden before his own spiritual practice, and his mental ability to then let go of the fact that he had strayed from the path of his personal commitment without feeling guilty or disappointed is a lesson for us all. We mustn't allow yesterday's actions to affect today's progress, because letting go is necessary to truly thrive today. We must also accept the transient nature of life. Things are not the same as they were before and are continuously trying to make them, so prevents us from seeing things as they are now. This is my first counterintuitive tip for battling burnout. Let it go. Stop trying. Accept the way things are and do what you can in the situation. That was the past. Why would you let it distract you from your present or your future? Every time you think about how you wish things would be or should be, whose voice are you hearing? Are you reminding yourself that it isn't that way by wishing that it was? It's like you're almost reinforcing what you don't want. So much of what you're experiencing can't be changed. It's out of your hands. So why are you still holding on to it? Let me share with you another story. This one was sent to me just the other day from a podcast listener like yourself, whose name I will not share out of deep respect. This is what this listener wrote. For as long as I can remember, I have attached my identity to teaching band. I started band in 7th grade, and ever since I have attached band to everything in my life. My goal has always been to become a great band director. If you look at different situations, right before COVID, for example, I had achieved many things. Conductor of multiple bands with many successful concerts, and led other adults to stellar performances, but yet always striving to get my school bands where I knew they could be. This year has certainly brought challenges, but in my case, unfortunately familiar, yet depressive feelings. I haven't been able to stay at any job for long, and because of that, I've worked in a myriad of situations. Some jobs have not had any band attached to them, and those were the ones that I finished the year out and ran from it as fast as I could. Other jobs have had a band and usually something attached to it, like general music, music survey, piano class, etc., and I didn't mind those gigs because what I loved to do was at least associated with them. However, in what seems to be a job that I'll stay in for a while now, I've been forced into a situation where my administration decided to have in-person school, but not have band. I can't say I didn't know it was coming, but as I've tried to be optimistic, it's getting harder and harder. I feel very detached from my students, my coworkers, and it's now starting to bleed into my family life. All around, I feel as if I'm putting on a smiling face for everyone, including my therapist, and it's getting harder. The reason I say this feeling is unfortunately familiar is because when I worked at those jobs without band, I felt detached from who I am. I felt as if I were having an out-of-body experience. This feeling is as bad as burnout, but instead of feeling apathetic, I feel as if I'm constantly yearning to teach band. I've thought about quitting, but obviously that would be a foolish move during a time where even if I got to teach band, it would be online, and changing jobs is not what I want to do, as I've grown very fond of my current students. I teach a piano class now, which I did get to choose, but it's started to get tougher mentally to think I'm not doing what I'd planned on doing. This also reminds me of a time that I was unemployed and feeling purposeless. Yet I am filling a purpose. Despite the feeling of being detached, I know that my students are benefiting from having piano instruction at school. I know that this exposure will aid them when we do get back to band, hopefully next year. I'm excited for this because my school does require band for grades 3 through 8, and this will just make them so much better. I guess my real question here is, how do I detach myself from this? In a normal year, I would be conducting community groups, teaching band and general music, possibly gigging on jazz gigs and practicing at home, or teaching my own kids. What suggestions do you have to someone who is so entangled with music, especially band, on how to separate their identity and just see it as a career and not as an identifier? Any advice? My advice was this: forget yourself. You're not just one thing, you're layers of things, a kaleidoscope of things, an onion of things. You are all of this, and yet so small and insignificant in this world. It all comes down to this: you get to decide how you identify yourself. It goes back to what I said before. If you're always thinking about what you don't have, you'll just be constantly reinforcing that you don't have that thing. Instead, you need to start wanting other things more. What other aspects of your life bring you passion and bring you joy? I remember the first time I went to a doctor for a sports injury. I was 30-something and had never been athletic, unless you counted marching band, of course. The doctor was asking how I injured myself, and I said I had crashed mountain biking or possibly tripped trail running. He said to me, "Oh, are you a cyclist? Are you a triathlete?" Well, yeah, I actually had 2 bikes that I love to ride, and why, yes, I was training for a triathlon, but I had never, until that moment, thought of myself as an athlete. Mother, sure. Wife, on occasion. Sister, friend, music teacher, many things, but never as an athlete. It took some time, but eventually I accepted the truth. I am a cyclist. I am a triathlete. I am an athlete of some kind. My passion for trail sports has gotten me through some of the most difficult times of my life, times when I've had to re-identify myself. The beauty of this life is that as long as we are alive, we still get to choose who we are. We just have to choose it. So if you can't have the thing that you're passionate about now, what are you passionate about now that you can have? You know, there was once a prince born into a royal family. Growing up, the prince was exceptionally intelligent and compassionate. Tall, strong, and handsome, he belonged to the warrior caste. It was predicted that he would become either a great king or a spiritual leader. Since his parents wanted a powerful ruler for their kingdom, they tried to prevent the prince from seeing the unsatisfactory nature of the world. They protected him from anything outside the palace walls. They surrounded him with every kind of pleasure. He was given anything he could want in an effort to prevent him from experiencing any kind of suffering. Like all who live in such luxury, it eventually held no appeal to him, and he decided to run away and leave the palace. Outside of the walls, he was confronted with the suffering of people. He saw someone laying in the street desperately sick. The next day, he saw a decrepit old man, and finally, a body near death. He was upset by this realization that old age, sickness, and death would eventually come to everyone he loved. The prince had no refuge to offer them, no way to protect them from the inevitable, from the sufferings of life. For years, he decided to live in suffering, experiencing the opposite of his life in the palace. Until one day, too, it lost his charm, and he realized that just as all must end, so is all suffering unpreventable. He wandered eventually to a tree by a beautiful river, and there sat in meditation for 40 days, until a guru walked by. When their eyes met and their minds linked, the prince stopped, mesmerized. In a flash, he realized that the perfection he had been seeking outside must be within the mind itself. He realized prevention of suffering was itself suffering, and accepting suffering brought relief. The prince became the Buddha. After years of practice, learning from many great masters and gurus, he finally reached enlightenment. At the moment of full realization, all veils of mixed feelings and stiff ideas dissolved, and Buddha experienced the all-encompassing here and now. All separation in time and space disappeared. Past, present, and future, near and far, melted into one radiant state of intuitive bliss. He became timeless, all-pervading awareness. Through every cell in his body, he knew and was everything. He became Buddha, the awakened one. After his enlightenment, Buddha traveled on foot throughout northern India. He taught constantly. For 45 years, he was a teacher. People of all castes and professions, from kings to courtesans, were drawn to him. He answered their questions, always pointing toward that which is ultimately real. This story of the Buddha teaches us some important lessons. Number one, that suffering is not bad or good. Like time itself, it just is. And just like time, it passes. Only by trying to stop the clock do we suffer. It also teaches us, this story of the Buddha, to see what is real, to get out of our own heads and accept. I want to share a personal story with you of my own. When my oldest child was 3, I knew it was time to have another. A few months later, I was thrilled to discover I was pregnant. With my first baby, I had required surgery due to an incurable condition I suffer from. So this little baby felt like a miracle to me. I called my family, filled with excitement. I calculated the due date. I started planning. 2 weeks later, I was no longer pregnant. I had lost that baby. I was devastated. As soon as I could, I was trying again, hoping, praying, begging for the baby to replace the one I'd lost. I deserved this baby. My daughter deserved to have this little baby brother or sister. And I was ready. The timing with my teaching job was right. It had to happen, and it had to happen right now. I spent far too many tears, wasting them on the stress and anxiety, wanting for something I couldn't have. One day I realized it was useless. So I gave up. I let it go. I decided to play with my little girl and be happy again. Here I had this beautiful, perfect little 3-year-old girl. Why was I putting all my hope and love into something that felt so out of my control? So I let it go. I planted a garden and I watched it grow. And by the time I started rehearsing for the winter concert with my bands and orchestras that next fall, I was pregnant again. This baby was and is such a special little human. And if I had not accepted that suffering and the subsequent letting it go, I'm not sure I could have made it through that school year or that delivery filled with the kind of love and appreciation that I did. Even looking back now at the challenging times I've been through, I don't look back with hurt or sorrow, but only gratitude. What can you find in this time to be grateful for? It's easy to find the things that are causing our suffering. Let's make it easy to find the good and let go of the things that we can't control. Before we close out this episode, I want to share with you a reading from one of my favorite books of all time, Lord of the Rings. It's right at the end where Frodo and Sam have made this great journey and are finally at the end. "I'm glad that you are here with me," said Frodo. "Here at the end of all things, Sam." "Yes, I am with you, Master," said Sam, laying Frodo's wounded hand gently to his chest. "And you're with me, and the journey's finished. But after coming all that way, I don't want to give up yet. It's not like me somehow, if you understand." "Maybe not, Sam," said Frodo, "but it's like things are in the world. Hopes fail. An end comes. We have only a little time to wait now. We are lost in ruin and downfall, and there is no escape." "Well, Master, we could at least go further from this dangerous place here, from this crack of doom, if that's its name. Now couldn't we? Come, Mr. Frodo, let's go down the path at any rate." "Very well, Sam. If you wish to go, I'll come," said Frodo, and they rose and went slowly down the winding road, and even as they passed toward the mountain's quaking feet, a great smoke and steam belched from the mountain, and the side of the cone was riven open, and a huge fiery vomit rolled in slow, thunderous cascade down from the eastern mountainside. Frodo and Sam could go no further. Their last strength of mind and body was swiftly ebbing. They had reached a low ashen hill, piled at the mountain's foot, but from it there was no more escape. It was an island now, not long to endure amid the torment of the mountain. All about it the earth gaped, and from deep rifts and pits smoke and fumes leaped up. Behind them the mountain was convulsed. Great rents opened in its side. Slow rivers of fire came down the long slopes toward them. Soon they would be engulfed. A rain of hot ash was falling. They stood now, and Sam still holding his master's hand. He sighed. "What a tale we have been, Mr. Frodo, haven't we?" he said. "I wish I could hear it told. Do you think they'll say, 'Now comes the story of Nine-Fingered Frodo and the Ring of Doom'? And then everyone will hush like we did when in Rivendell they told us the tale of Baron One Hand and the Great Jewel. I wish I could hear it, and I wonder how it will go on after our part." But even while he spoke so, to keep fear away until the very last, his eyes still strayed far above the mountains in the western sky. The night was still dim and pale. There, peeping among the cloud rack above the dark tor high up in the mountains, Sam saw a white star twinkle for a while. The beauty of it smote his heart as he looked up out of the forsaken land, and hope returned to him. For like a shaft cold and clear, the thought pierced him that in the end the shadow was only a small and passing thing. There was light and high beauty forever beyond its reach. Earlier in the story, Sam feels despair and loss. He thinks that Frodo is dead or maybe alive, but he can't find him to save him. And what Sam does is he sits down and he sings a song. A song that was more of defiance than of hope. For in that moment, his worries ceased to trouble him. And that is the power of music. It's the power of hope, to see beauty far beyond what our eyes can see today, and to know that this is just a passing moment, and that there is untouchable beauty beyond what we're living through right now. Challenges make us who we are. And sometimes the best thing we can do is just not try, but to trust. Sometimes the best thing we can do is not to add, but to subtract. It's not to do, but to not do. Sometimes we need to not give more of ourselves, but to give more to ourselves. We fill our lives with things, with sounds, but can we fill our lives instead with silence? My friends, all of this will pass. Change is inevitable. In fact, change is the only thing that's constant. But what you shouldn't change is your own joy. Don't prevent it. Don't wait to love and be joyful. And don't forget that you are a powerful being. And when all other things seem out of control, maybe that is the time to use your power to relinquish that control. Thank you again for spending this short time with me. I know how incredibly valuable your time is. If you found these stories valuable, please share them with those who you know need it right now. Remember that being apart from each other doesn't mean we have to feel apart from each other. Connect with your friends, reach out for those who need it, and keep teaching on.